Scott versus Sanford, 1857. The holding of Dred Scott v. Sanford is well known. People of African American descent, whether free or enslaved, could never be citizens of the United States, or any state for that matter. However, far less understood are the facts that gave rise to Dred Scott's challenge and the specific mechanics of Chief Justice Taney's opinion. Since the ratification of the Constitution, each side of the increasingly bitter dispute over slavery feared that the other would gain the upper hand in Congress from the admissions of new states into the Union. This resulted in the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which prohibited slavery for all new states north of the 3630 line. This and other actions of Congress were intended to ensure that for every slave state, a free state would be admitted to the Union, thereby preserving the political equipoise in the Senate. This infamous case, which belongs in the anti-canon, began when Dred Scott, a slave, asked the courts to declare that he and his wife were emancipated when their owner transported them to a U.S. fort located in free territory and to the free state of Illinois. Scott initially won his case in the Missouri lower courts before the Missouri Supreme Court reversed its precedents to hand him a loss. He then took his case to federal court. As you learned in civil procedure, federal courts have jurisdiction to hear diversity suits that involve citizens of different states. If Scott was in fact a citizen of Missouri, he could sue his master, who was a citizen of New York. If Scott was not a citizen, however, the case must be dismissed because the court would lack jurisdiction. Chief Justice Taney's opinion had two major parts. First, to decide whether the federal courts had jurisdiction, Chief Justice Taney had to resolve whether Scott was a citizen of the United States. Here, citing the history of slaves in the United States, the court held that descendants of African slaves could never become citizens, even if they were emancipated under state law. Study guide. Does this decision offer a valid critique of originalist methods of interpretation? Second, assuming the court had jurisdiction, which it did not, Taney went on to decide whether Scott was emancipated when his owner brought him north to a free territory. Under the Missouri Compromise, Congress had decided that present-day Minnesota, where Fort Snelling was located, would be a free soil jurisdiction. Taney invalidated the Missouri Compromise, holding that the Fifth Amendment's Due Process Clause protected the right of slave owners' property in their slaves, thus depriving them of their property when in a federal territory ran afoul of the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment. Study guide. Can you see how some use Dred Scott to criticize the doctrine of substantive due process? The vote in Dred Scott was 7-2. Justice Curtis dissented, noting that the Constitution was not made exclusively for the white race. When that document was ratified, people of African descent could be citizens in at least 5 states. In his separate dissent, Justice McLean wrote that, quote, "A slave is not mere chattel. He bears the impress of his maker and is amenable to the laws of God and man." Study guide. Was Dred Scott correctly decided at the time? As a historical matter, the Dred Scott case may well have contributed to the Civil War. Northerners feared that this was a mere stepping stone to the courts protecting Southerners taking their slaves into free states. This decision was reversed not by the Supreme Court, but after a bloody Civil War by the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments.